This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video we're looking at one of the greatest albums of the 1960s that America missed. In 1964, the Beatles launched the British invasion of America, opening the door for not just bands like the Rolling Stones and The Who, but also for groups like Freddie and the Dreamers and Herman's Hermits. But not the Small Faces. The success they enjoyed in Britain never really translated across the Atlantic, and even an album like this couldn't change that. So in this video, I want to look at why that is, and also show you, with the help of this new mono band approved reissue, why Ogden's Nut Gone Flake really deserves to be in more people's collections. To understand how all that happened, let's go back to where the story began.
1965.
It begins in a music shop in Manor Park, East London, where Steve Marriott meets Ronnie Lane and Kenny Jones for the first time. And within days, they've formed a band. They quickly build a reputation on the London club circuit as a sharp young group rooted in the mod scene. But there's a contrast at the heart of the band early on. Live, they were very much an R&B group, but to get a foothold in the industry, they had to make pop records. And that tension between what they were and what they were expected to be is right there from the beginning. And it matters because it shapes everything that follows. They quickly come under the management of Don Arden, one of the most powerful and ruthless figures in the British music business at that time. He immediately sets about securing them a recording contract with Decca Records and puts the band on a wage of £20 a week. Arden's approach was all about control. When he was accused of exploiting his artists, he replied that he only exploited people for their own benefit, which gives you some idea of how he operated. But for all his faults, Arden knew his job, and things moved quickly for the Small Faces. A run of hit singles followed, including Sha-La-La-La-Lee, All or Nothing, and My Mind's Eye, establishing them as one of the most exciting British groups of the time. The next step for a group like this was to head to America, but there was a problem, and its name was Don Arden. Because it would have meant handing over some control to local management, he vetoed the move, and instead offered the band a series of low-profile support slots travelling around in the back of a van, which they turned down. Meanwhile, other British groups were busy building audiences in America, but the Small Faces weren't. Aside from Ichiku Park, which became their one major US hit, they never really broke through, and like the Kinks, remained a largely British band. And yet creatively, this is exactly the moment where things started to blossom. In some ways, it's a situation not unlike the Kinks, who, after being effectively shut out of America, went on to produce some of their most distinctive work. For the Small Faces, the shift comes when they leave Decca Records and move to Immediate Records, the label run by the Stones manager Andrew Loog Oldham, and that change turns out to be crucial. Immediate was a very different kind of label. Younger, more forward-thinking, and in the band's view, they were treated with a level of respect they hadn't experienced under Arden and Decca. Oldham himself was quite open about being in the business to make money, but he also gave them time in the studio, space to experiment, and the freedom to start making records that actually reflected who they were. By 1967, like many bands of the time, they began experimenting more, both sonically and chemically. Songs like Green Circles move into much more psychedelic territory, and tracks like Here Come the Nice, essentially a song about drugs, managed to slip past the BBC largely unnoticed. A key figure in all of this was Glyn Johns, whose role in shaping the sound of these records was absolutely crucial. Moving the band from 4-track into 8-track recording at Olympic Studios, one of the leading independent studios in London at the time, gave them a lot more to work with. Following the success of Ichiku Park in August 1967, they recorded Tin Soldier, which for many, including the band themselves, represents a kind of peak. This was the moment when everything came together for the band. The songwriting, the performance, and the production. At the same time, things within the band were starting to change. Because while Steve Marriott had been the dominant writing force, this is really the point where Ronnie Lane begins to be properly credited, and that brings a different voice into the music. If you're anything like me, whether you're building a collection, running a small business, or even just organising your interests online, having a proper website makes a real difference, and that's exactly what Squarespace is designed to help with. It's an all-in-one platform, so you can build a site, manage your content, and even run an online store, all in one place. Their award-winning templates are very well designed, easy to customize, and importantly, they don't require any technical knowledge to get started. One thing I particularly like is how straightforward it is to organize and present things clearly, whether it's a collection, a catalog, or something more content-driven. Everything just works as you'd expect it to. You also get built-in analytics, SEO tools, and everything you need to manage your site without having to rely on multiple different services. So if you'd like to try it yourself, head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Parlogram to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So thanks again to Squarespace for supporting the channel, and now let's get back to the video. Ogden's Nut Gone Flake was released on May the 24th, 1968, and in Britain is a major success. At the time, the album was seen as something quite different. A contemporary review in the New Musical Express described it as a landmark for the group, placing it alongside artists like the Beach Boys and the Jimi Hendrix Experience, while also noting just how unusual it was, particularly on its second side. The album reaches number 1 on the UK charts, where it stays for 6 weeks from June to August 1968. In America, though, it's a very different story, where it only reached number 159 on the Billboard chart. So this isn't a cult record, it's a hit.
1968.
The way this album came together wasn't exactly straightforward. Informal is probably the best way of describing it. There are stories of the band taking boats out on the Thames, stopping off, having a drink, and working on songs as they went. At one point, they had enough material for one side, but side 2 and the concept were still missing, and it was Ronnie Lane who provided the missing piece.
Are you sitting comfortable 2 square on your body? Then we'll begin.
Happiness Stan. A simple story about a character trying to understand where the missing half of the moon has gone. And that becomes the thread that ties everything together. They initially approached Spike Milligan to narrate it, but when he was busy, they turned to Stanley Unwin, a British comedian known for his distinctive, almost nonsensical style of speech. Unwin listens to the tracks, listens to how the band talk to each other, works out his part, and then comes back and records it. And it's that what gives the album its structure. At the same time, there's still a sense of spontaneity, particularly in the way some of the songs are written. Steve Marriott later talked about writing from how he felt in the moment, and you can hear that immediacy in the music. Marriott had moved out to Chiswick, a very quiet part of London. Much to the annoyance of his more conservative neighbours, the house was often filled with friends and loud music. So the song itself is based on his experience of annoying the neighbours. Oldham releases it as a single in May 1968, and it becomes a big hit, peaking at number 2 in the UK chart. But not everybody in the band was entirely happy about that. For some, coming after Tin Soldier, its jaunty, almost comedic feel felt like a step backwards, and that created a bit of tension as the album came together. And all of that feeds into what the album becomes. Even the title reflects that. The circular sleeve was designed to resemble a tobacco tin, based on original Victorian artwork from the Ogden's archive. The original product was Ogden's Nut Brown Flake, but they changed brown to gone, as in, your nut's gone. The title and design give the album a kind of authenticity. It feels less like a piece of design and more like something that already existed. In terms of how it sounds, this is one of those albums where the vinyl format really suits it. The new edition faithfully reproduces Pete Brown and Nick Twiddell's vibrant graphics, and Gerard Mankowitz's photographs of the band are beautifully presented. The decision to house it in a 12-inch outer sleeve also makes a lot of sense. It's simply easier to store and better protected. All of the details on this new issue have been carefully reproduced, and you even get a reproduction of the original mono master tape box. Thankfully, this new issue has a modern polylined inner, which is a major improvement over the original's clear polythene bag. Originally issued in both mono and stereo, this new half-speed mastered edition opts for the more cohesive mono mix, which in my opinion works best for this music. The vinyl is clean, flat and sounds warm and detailed, which I really liked, so hats off to the mastering team at Air for this great sounding disc. If mono isn't your preference, there's also a 3 CD edition, which includes both the original mono and stereo mixes, along with a third disc of rarities and outtakes. An important aspect of this release is that it's been put together under the supervision of Kenny Jones, working alongside Rob Cager, and released through the band's own label, Nice Records. Now this is an entirely personal recommendation from me. I paid for the album and the t-shirt myself, but I'll put links in the description if you want to take a look for yourself. And while so much of this exists in the studio, we're extremely fortunate that some of it survives visually through their appearance on the BBC programme Colour Me Pop. The fact that this performance still exists gives us a rare glimpse into the band at that moment. Watching it now, you get a sense of how much potential was still there, because not long after this, things began to change quite quickly, and the version of the Small Faces that made this album doesn't last much longer, which is part of what makes this album so interesting. It feels complete and it feels confident, but it also feels like a moment that couldn't really be repeated. And that's why it stands out, not just as a successful album or one that didn't quite travel, but something that captures the band at a very specific point, just before everything is starting to open up and just before everything begins to come apart. I really hope you enjoyed our look at this wonderful album. Do let me know what other albums you'd like to see us cover on the channel, and I'll add them to my list. I'll be back next weekend with some more fascinating stories and sounds from the 60s. But that's all for this one, so I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.
But stay cool, man. Stay cool, don't you?
Mustn't grumble.